Well, a very warm welcome to my vegetable plot. And it is a warm welcome because now we're at the beginning of June and there are a number of vegetables now that can be sown directly outside because the risk of frost has passed. And in this video, I'm going to share with you 12 vegetables that you can sow in June to give you a good harvest over the summer and autumn period. Now, for the purposes of this video, all of the sowing times and dates are based upon where I'm located, which is in the centre of the UK in the West Midlands. If you're looking at hardiness zones, I'm in hardiness zone 8A. That's comparable with zone 8 of the hardiness zones in the USA. But the good news is that at this time of year in most parts of the world, the risk of frost has passed. So a lot of the vegetables I'm going to show you today are going to be able to be sown in many parts of the world. But it's always worth making sure that you check first just to make sure that it suits your particular location. Now let me start off with one of my absolute favourites, which is beetroot. I have a regular supply of beetroot all through the summer period, and as you can see I've already got some in now, but June is a perfect time for sowing more beetroot. Now this year I've been trying two new varieties for the first time. The first one is one called Pablo F1 and the second variety is a variety called Moneta. Both of these are your traditional rounded beetroot, but those of you who watched the channel before will know that I also grow a variety called Renova. And these are more like a carrot-shaped beetroot. I grew these last year and they grew very, very well, but I did find some of them fairly small. So I've gone back to the traditional type of beetroot that I've always grown, which are the rounded ones. Beetroot are fairly easy to grow. All you need to do is make sure the ground is well dug and prepared so you get a really fine tilth, and then sow them in drills at round about a depth of 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres and about 12 inches apart. Beetroot seeds are like little clusters, so you can pick them up and you can plant them where you want them, so you can make them and space them exactly how you want them. And I would say with beetroots, from my experience, they're much better sown directly outside than in pods because they're one of the vegetables that don't transplant very well. They can transplant and they do transplant, but they do sometimes take a little bit more time to adapt to the outside conditions compared to other vegetables. So sowing them directly outside in June is absolutely perfect. Another fantastic vegetable for sowing in June is peas. In fact, these ones you can see here, I started indoors about a month and a half ago and transplanted them out. But now we get to June and the temperature's fine, it's perfect time for sowing them directly outside. Now these are a variety called Calvin and Wonder, and they're a fantastic variety, very popular variety of peas. And when sowing these directly into the ground, as always, prepare the ground and then sow them around about 2 inches deep, which is around about 5 centimetres. So the seeds are little tiny balls which you can pick up and you can place them where you want them, and ideally 3 inches apart. Well, that's what the packet says. I tend to do mine a little bit closer and do them in 2 rows, and that way if you lose a few you've got something that will fill the gaps. What you'll find with peas is that it will need some protection. So when they start to germinate and start to emerge through the ground, they can be very popular with birds and other types of insects. So if you give them a light covering with mesh or some form of netting, just till they get a little bit larger, that will protect them. And as you can see, you will need some form of support to allow the peas to grow up. The peas will find their way up the support on their own, and all you need to do is just keep an eye for any that are straggling, just to push them back into position. But they do take very little maintenance. So peas or mange too are something that are fantastic for sowing in June. Now if you want a continuous supply of lettuce all through the summer and into autumn and even into winter, because there are winter varieties as well, June is the perfect time to continue growing your lettuce. As you can see here, I've currently got 4 varieties of lettuce outside. I've got Lola Rossa, I've got Little Gem, I've got Lakeland, and I've got All the Year Round. These should be ready to harvest in around about 3 to 4 weeks, but I have got another sowing of lettuce which are in my polyhouse in pods. Now in June you could sow your lettuce seeds directly outside. As with the other vegetables we've just looked at, if you prepare the ground correctly, then you'll be able to put them straight into the ground. So if I'm going to sow my lettuce directly outside, I will dig the ground, rake it over, and then what I'll do is I'll get my finger and make a very shallow drill with my finger, and then I'll put a very light sprinkling of compost before I put the seeds in, and then cover it with compost. I tend to find that gives a really high success rate for germination. But if you've got good soil, good well draining and fine soil wherever you are, there's no reason why you can't just sow them directly into the ground. So lettuce are fantastic for sowing in June, as are another summer salad vegetable, and that is spring onions. Now, just like lettuce, spring onions are something that you will want a regular supply of over the summer and autumn period. So in order to achieve that, you need to be sowing them roughly every 3 weeks in the amounts that you need. So with spring onions, I grow quite a number of varieties, but my favourite is a variety called Ramrod. They're a variety that I've grown now for a number of years, and I do find the onions that these produce are slightly bigger than the other types of varieties. Another variety that I know you'll be familiar with is something called White Lisbon. That seems to be a lot of people's favourites. But also this year, for the first time, I've been trying 2 new varieties of spring onions, Ishikura and Elodie, and they seem to be okay from what I've seen so far. And there's absolutely no reason in June why you can't plant spring onions directly into the ground, as long as the ground is prepared properly in exactly the same way that I just spoke about for preparing the ground for the lettuce. So in order to sow the seeds, I'll put a small amount of seeds into my hand, and I'll get my forefinger and thumb, pick a few up, and then just rotate them and scatter them where I want them. Roughly, you want to be sowing them to a depth of around about 1 to 1.5 centimetres, which is 10 millimetres to 15 millimetres deep. Cover them over and then water them. And there's nothing wrong with sowing spring onions in clumps. You don't have to sow them individually. In fact, sowing them in clumps is fantastic because when they're ready to harvest, you can just pull up a bunch all in one go. Now, something I've grown successfully for years and something that I really love is cucumbers. These are an outdoor ridge variety called Market More 76, and they're really the only variety that I grow because they're so successful every year. Now, cucumbers do need warm temperatures in order to germinate, and these ones you see in front of me here were started a month ago in my polyhouse, and they're ready to go outside now, which I'm going to do over the next few days. Now, because the temperature starts to get nice and warm in June, it's a perfect time to sow cucumber seeds directly outside. So after I've prepared the ground, I will sow the seeds directly into the ground, and they don't need to be sown very deep. In fact, they only need a very small covering of soil, or if you want to give them a bit of a layer of compost on top, that's absolutely fine. Now, cucumbers can take quite a large area of your vegetable plot unless you do what I do and train them. I will train mine up canes, so I'll build a frame and then I will attach the cucumbers as they grow to the frames. And because I'm growing them upwards, it doesn't take an awful lot of area horizontally in my vegetable plot. So cucumbers are perfect for sowing directly outside in June. And if you've not tried Market More 76 before, I definitely recommend that you give these a try. Now, the next 3 suggestions for sowing in June are all brassicas, and there's no reason why brassicas can't be sown directly outside. But as you can see, if you are going to sow brassicas, particularly outside, they are going to need some protection because everything seems to like brassicas. Pigeons, other types of birds, insects, butterflies, caterpillars, whatever you name it, they tend to really love brassicas. And if you're sowing them outside and you don't protect them, as soon as they emerge from the ground, something will have them. So as you can see here, I've got an early sowing of brassicas in here, which are heavily netted. This is scaffold netting, which will allow light, water and air through, but very few insects. So my 3 suggestions for brassicas to sow directly outside in June are kale. This is a variety called Dwarf Green Curl. I have already got some in here, but I want a later harvest, so I will sow some more directly into the ground in June. So that's kale. Also, we have cauliflower, which is a very popular variety called All the Year Round. That'll be sown directly into the ground. And also I'll be sowing 2 varieties of cabbage, one called Golden Acre, and the other is my favourite cabbage, which is Cabis. All of those will be sown directly outside in June. Now, these seeds will be sown to a depth of round about 1.5 centimetres, and I will cover mine in a thin layer of compost. Now, because the seeds are so small, you need to try and sow them as thinly as possible, and you may need to thin them out once they start to grow because they will need a space. Typically, you want to give them about 18 to 24 inches, that's 1.5 to 2 feet of space in their final positions. Now, another fantastic vegetable for sowing in June is Swede. Now, this is my major success story from last year. I had an amazing crop of Swede last year. In fact, there are videos on my channel which I'll put a link below to show you exactly how to grow Swede, and I'm going to grow the same variety again, which is Helena. Now, this batch of Swedes here was sown a little bit earlier, about 4 to 5 weeks ago, and these are now ready to go outside. Swedes are a Brassica, so they will need protecting, but these can be sown now directly outside, and I'll be sowing another batch of Swedes outside in the next couple of days, and that will help to give me a regular constant supply of really nice Swede or rutabaga. So when you're sowing seeds, it's very similar to what we've just looked at for sowing brassicas. Sow them thinly at round about 1.5 centimetres in depth, and then when they emerge you will need to thin them out, because these will need a bit of space. They get quite bulky in terms of their leaf spread, so you want these about 18 inches to 24 inches apart, which is 1.5 to 2 feet. But Swedes are a great crop to sow directly outside in June, and if you haven't tried Helena as a variety, then definitely give that one a try. Another fantastic salad vegetable to sow in June is spinach. There's lots of varieties of spinach available. These are the darker green type of spinach and more the baby spinach, which are perfect for salads, stir fries and whatever else you want to do with them. I've grown a few earlier in the year in this raised bed, but I'll now be sowing some directly outside because the weather conditions are going to be perfect for spinach. They need to be sown quite thinly, just to a depth of around about 2.5 centimetres, around about an inch, and water them well. And when they emerge, you might need to transplant them just to give them a little bit of space, but again, keep them well watered. And when they start to produce the spinach leaves, if you cut the leaves off rather than the whole plant, they'll keep producing. So spinach is a fantastic crop to sow in June, and this variety is a variety called Samish F1 if you want to give that a try. Now, a little bit earlier we looked at peas, and another variety very similar in terms of the way they grow to peas are climbing French beans. This is a variety here called Blue Lake, and these are perfect for sowing outside directly into the ground in June. They need to be sown in exactly the same way as peas, at around about 2.5 centimetres, around about an inch in depth, and keep them at 18 inches, about 1.5 foot apart. And just like peas, they will need some support to climb their way up. The great thing about climbing French beans is that they find their way up the supports themselves, but just like the peas, you do need to protect them when they start to emerge, because they will be attacked by birds and other insects when they're at their tender seedling stage. Once they get beyond that and start to grow, they'll be perfectly fine. Peas and beans do need to be watered regularly, so keep an eye on that if you get longer periods of dry weather. There's a whole range of varieties of climbing French beans for you to try. Cobra is a particularly popular one, which I've grown in the past and they've been very successful. Blue Lake is one I'm trying for the first time, so I'm looking forward to seeing how they get on. And last but not least of my 12 recommendations for vegetable seeds to sow in June is butternut squash. Now ideally these should be sown in April or in May, but there's no reason why you can't sow them right at the beginning of June. Now unlike most of the other vegetables, with butternut squash I am going to start them in pots inside my polyhouse. And the main reason for that is that I tend to find they germinate better fully in compost rather than in soil. I suppose that depends upon the type of soil that you have. And for me, I've always had success with butternut squash, sowing them directly into pots, into compost, and then transplanting them out. This is a variety called Butterfly F1, and there's only 8 seeds in this packet here, but if they all germinate, 8 is an awful lot. Now, butternut squash do take up an awful lot of space if you allow them to grow all through your ground. So there are ways in which you can train these up timber frames and other supports to try and reduce the amount of space that they create. Now once these plants are ready to plant outside, I'm going to plant them at round about 2.5 to 3 feet apart to give them plenty of space to grow. And there you have my 12 recommendations for seeds you can sow in June. Now of course that's not exhaustive, they're my recommendations. There are plenty of other things like carrots and mange too, and radish and turnips and pak choi that you could think about sowing in June also. So what are your favourite vegetables to sow in June? It'd be great if you could share that, just to give others 1 or 2 ideas about what they might think about sowing for themselves. So thank you very much for watching, and if you did enjoy the video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button, and I'll see you all on the next video.